Story 1. I woke up one day a couple of years ago with massive holes in my memory. I didn't know what year it was or the names of my friends or coworkers. Eventually, I got to the doctor and then the hospital because of my amazing partner's help. The doctors thought it was a transient ischemic attack, but I had no physical symptoms. It took 11 hours for my memory to start coming back. An MRI revealed no anomalies at all. The doctors kind of just shrugged and said, "Stress maybe?" And that was it. The next week was one of the worst weeks for my mental health I've ever had. I've been good ever since. I don't know what it was, but I hope it doesn't happen again. Story 2. I tried to hit snooze on my alarm, but my brain was still asleep, so it thought I needed to make tiny ripples in my water glass. I kept gently poking the water, trying to get the sound to stop. Story 3. I once picked up an egg from the fridge and then threw it over my shoulder. Cannot explain why. Story 4. It takes my body to random rooms in my house and then refuses to tell me why it brought me there. Story 5. I had my first real panic attack about 6 years ago. Now, mind you, I've always been a stern, resilient person who doesn't shy away from challenges. Let me tell you, I had zero control over my body. I struggled with my breathing, experienced numbness in my face and arms, my fingers curled, and I found myself crying and sobbing with every exhale, then laughing at myself with every inhale once I realized what was happening. Facing years of trauma that I had seemingly ignored or pretended didn't bother me, and suddenly succumbing to things I had long forgotten about, was something I would have never given myself permission to do. My empathy for those who genuinely deal with these issues regularly increased significantly after that day. Cognitive therapy and changes in my diet helped me tremendously. Thank you for listening to my story. Story 6. During the haze of bringing up a newborn, I woke up to him crying. I got up and started making the bed, thinking I was swaddling him. My wife said, "Go get the baby. He's crying." I am. Then I realized I was just mushing together my own sheets, and the baby was still crying on the other side of the room in his bassinet. Story 7. About once a week when I sleep, my head explodes. It feels like my eardrums are popping and my eyeballs are exploding, while my brain is being electrocuted. For a second, it feels like I am dying. Story 8. I tell myself it wasn't worth living back in my teenage years. I'm nearing 50 now, and life has been all right. Story 9. I had cooked lunch on the stovetop, and just after I finished, my mother came in to ask if the stove was still hot. Instead of saying, "Yes, Mom, I've just finished cooking. Of course the stove is still hot," my brain decided to respond by placing my full hand directly onto the hot plate. I'm not sure which hurt more, my fingerprints being burned off or her withering stare. Story 10. It played music for me when I was sleeping, and I woke up to it. I don't mean earworm. It was like I had headphones on. At first, I thought it was my neighbors being loud, but the song kept its volume and clarity no matter what part of the apartment I was in. It was a strange night, and it has never happened again. Story 11. I imagined my ex-boyfriend cheating on me, and I couldn't help but feel it deeply. It was irrational because I knew for a fact he hadn't been. My mind just took over for reasons I couldn't understand. Story 12. Long ago, before WhatsApp, I typed a message that my unreasonable boss had rejected my leave application. Instead of sending it to my wife, I almost sent it to my boss. I realized my mistake just before hitting the send button. Story 13. Have some of the dreams that it has. I dream very vividly, and you couldn't extract some of those stories from me. Story 14. I went to swat a mosquito on my arm and accidentally slapped myself in the face instead. This occurred when my postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome tremors were severe. Story 15. I once wanted to open a package, and while I was holding the knife, I thought, if I do this, I'll cut myself, and then proceeded to cut myself. Story 16. I was praying, and suddenly my mind replayed some intimate moments with my boyfriend. I felt embarrassed. Story 17. Migraines with aura. The more severe ones left me mostly blind during the attack. They also left me completely drained of energy afterward. Story 18. Long ago, I took some random pills, and as soon as I got home, I broke a broom handle and set it in concrete poured into my good Tupperware to make hammers. I remember thinking this is what I had to do. I was on a mission, but I can't explain why. It was probably some substance in those pills. Story 19. I spent a whole afternoon making proper stock from scratch. The last step was separating the bones and vegetables so I could store my liquid gold in freezer containers. I decided that the right tool for the job was a colander, but I accidentally tipped all the stock down the sink. Story 20. I drove right into a parking barrier that I clearly saw in front of me. I felt it was like having a mini stroke. Story 21. I have had migraines my whole life, and along with them come auras, some of which are visual. I recently experienced a new one that should have freaked me out. It looked like wavy, zigzag, holographic rainbow lines in my peripheral vision. Story 22. Pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorders associated with streptococcal infections ruined my childhood and early teen years. Story 23. I was walking when I suddenly waved at someone I didn't know who was in the middle of a crowd. Felt awkward. Story 24. Flashbacks of my deceased sister flooded my mind. I collapsed to the floor and lost consciousness, finding myself in a room with my sister, hearing my mother scream. Then I would return to reality on the floor, hearing someone scream. Unbeknownst to me, it was my own voice, before drifting back into the dark void. The void is honestly what I imagined death to be like. I felt bodiless, floating in blackness, but it was completely silent, despite my real-life screams, and incredibly peaceful. It was like a warm hug, and I have never felt peace like that since. Then the scene would shift back to my sister, then back to the darkness over and over, until my then-boyfriend managed to pull me out of it. He kept saying my name, and I could hear it while in those states. I had to focus on him saying it and recognize who it was to pull myself out of the cycle. Story 25. I developed severe chronic depression at age 9. I am 45 now, and it is exhausting. I never gave permission for this situation. Story 26. I once annoyingly swatted my phone halfway across a store. My brain thought I had the hand-eye coordination to catch it as it fell. Instead, I smacked it mid-fall and sent it flying. Story 27. If I feel a strong enough emotion, my brain sometimes switches off language processing. What purpose does that serve? My boyfriend hugs me when I get home from a bad day, and I can't even say hello. This is frustrating. Story 28. When I was younger, my mind would often plan escape routes and rescue scenarios randomly at church, the grocery store, or while stuck in traffic. It was strange but enjoyable. Story 29. I used my dreams to realize that the reason I am single 22 years after my divorce is that I have never actually processed it emotionally. Story 30. I was driving home late at night when I blinked and was suddenly very close to my house. I went from about 1 hour away to 5 minutes away. I know this has happened to other people when reading similar stories due to muscle memory, tiredness, and other factors, but when it happens to you, it is very surreal. Story 31. Teleporting to my destination, I arrive with no memory of the trip. Passengers notice nothing unusual, but my brain simply decides it didn't need to record the experience. Story 32. Me. Why are you playing smooth criminal? Brain. I'm bored. Me. I'm trying to concentrate on spreadsheets. Brain. He came into the window and a blow-dough, ate a hobo. Me. At least play a song you know the lyrics to. Brain. Sammy is an ashtray, an airway jammy. Story 33. I was not allowed to walk until I was 4, talk without sign language until I was 6, or focus due to attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I suspect there may be several neurological disorders affecting me. Story 34. Replayed a conversation from 7 years ago in the shower as if it were a season finale I needed to emotionally process again. Story 35. Violent and disturbing intrusive thoughts are overwhelming. I never asked for any of this. I will try to force a different thought, but then I end up having 2 thoughts at the same time. I hate it. Story 36. The memory that stands out is when I was in high school, trying to write a last-minute essay. I stayed up so late working on it that I must have been falling asleep, yet I was somehow still typing. When I printed out and reread the essay in the morning before school, I discovered that, interspersed with the relevant material in what I believe was a history essay, I had also written about how to prepare an ice cream sundae. Story 37. I once wore a second pair of underpants over my underpants. I intended to put on my socks but forgot, and my mind decided I needed more pants. My mind was on autopilot due to significant distress during my exam period at the time. I also sometimes find my cell phone in the fridge. Story 38. I woke up one day in 2003 and spoke with a perfect British accent all day. I went to sleep, and the next day when I woke up, it was gone. I have no clue how or why it happened. Story 39. I wanted to put my phone down beside my pillow and rub my sleepy face, but I ended up combining the two and, long story short, my nose bled. Story 40. I had a dream that became a split screen. It had never happened before or since, but in the dream, I had to make a decision and ended up seeing both options play out simultaneously. Story 41. I once lost 2 hours while watching Star Trek with a boyfriend. It was endless reruns of the original series on late-night television. The simple answer is that I was asleep, but I don't remember feeling drowsy or waking up. He says I was talking and commenting on the episodes the whole time. I glanced at the clock, and when I looked back a moment later, 2 hours had passed. Story 42. I wanted to talk about the time I removed a 50-hour 3D print from the build plate at 84% completion when I just wanted to check on it. Everyone here has such impressive stories, and now mine feels insignificant. Story 43. I am currently ill. A few nights ago, I had a really intense fever and spent the entire night somehow believing I was stuck as a cube. I can't explain how that felt, but it felt so real at the time. The issue was that throughout the night of being stuck as this cube, I also convinced myself that my local council was on their way to arrest me because I didn't have a permit or legal grounds to be a cube. It was the weirdest experience ever. Story 44. 2 things. 1. The name of a girl I barely knew 30 years ago will randomly pop up like a movie scene title, for example, Alaska 1932. I have no idea why this happens. This started a couple of years ago. Sometimes, as I'm waking up, my room and everything in it looks like the wireframe view in a 3D modeling program. Quickly goes away, but I still think it's strange. Story 45. I chased a hallucination of a cat around my room, once in the middle of the night, because of a new sleep medication. I didn't even get to catch it before I realized I don't have a cat, and it disappeared. Story 46. Thanks to the sleeping pill Ambien, when I was going through cancer, I shopped online in the middle of the night and did not realize it until the packages arrived on the porch. I initially thought it was my husband placing the orders. Upon checking, I discovered it was me. No more Ambien for me. Luckily, I ordered items I intended to buy instead of random junk. Story 47. I had a hallucination, probably induced by alcohol withdrawal, where I saw a man in a car's front passenger seat without eyes. I was so puzzled. I tried to shake it off, but he was right there. A man without eyes, only blank skin where his eyes and eye sockets should have been. I was alone, so I couldn't ask anyone if it was real or not. I leaned towards it being a hallucination, but to this day I'm still not sure. Story 48. I told someone I was going to confront them for interrupting me. I am just not that kind of person, and it felt like a genuine moment of frustration. Story 49. My parents heat their house partially with wood. One time, I was starting the wood burner when my arm accidentally rested on the feed chute, a piece of black cast iron that was probably around 400 degrees Fahrenheit. I still have a scar from that incident. Story 50. Tells my limbs to randomly spasm. I have thrown random objects in strange directions more than I can count. Story 51. Panic attacks occurred while I was using my computer at work. I didn't even have a deadline, yet I felt short of breath and shaky. Now, as a certified Lexapro user, I no longer experience severe constipation when traveling. Story 52. Calculated everything that will happen in the future. It regulates hormones and blood sugar without me even knowing. Story 53. At a sleepover party, a friend was sitting at the top of a bunk bed. I climbed the ladder and kissed her on the cheek. Then I snapped out of it, and we both wondered what had just happened. I have no idea what was going on in my head. Story 54. Confused Sherlock Holmes and Jack the Ripper during a conversation. I still think about it, and it happened 10 years ago. It was a complete lapse in judgment, and I'm not sure what caused it. Story 55. I realize I am getting my hopes up despite telling myself not to, knowing I am setting myself up for failure. Here we are, thanks to my mind. Story 56. Sleepwalk. I made coffee, got ready for work, ate, and tried to hide the evidence. I cut my hair and started the bathwater, only to let it flood the house. Story 57. I closed the lid on a large metal container, and my brain instructed my hand to grab the rim as it fell. Nothing broke, but it hurt significantly. Story 58. I was sick at that time with a fever and woke up in the middle of the night, seeing things as if I were shifting through dimensions. I experienced a panic attack and said out loud, "How can anything exist like this?" Eventually, I calmed myself down by reminding myself that we live in 3 dimensions. Felt like an episode of Star Trek. Story 59. I used to suffer from night terrors as a child until I was about 8. Felt like a nightmare, but my body was physically up and moving. While that is itself odd, I was not making the choice to run around my childhood home screaming. As an adult, my partner has told me that about once a month I shout in my sleep, normally a single sentence directed toward whoever I am talking to, and then that is it. Story 60. During COVID, I was prescribed sleeping pills for a few weeks to give my body some rest. Every morning while on these medications, I would hear loud music for 5 minutes as I was waking up. The doctor said it was a strange side effect. It sounded like electric light orchestra. Story 61. One time I went to give someone a thumbs up, and I accidentally flipped them off. I don't know how that happened, and I was not ready to explain myself. Story 62. Told me I was already awake, getting dressed for school and almost ready, just for my dad to come into my room and say, "Wake up!" I dreamt it all. Story 63. I thought to myself that I should water my plants, so I picked up my freshly boiled kettle and carried it to the bathroom. I don't water my plants with the kettle, especially when it's hot and my plants are outside. Just a week ago, I was woken from a deep sleep by a dog barking loudly right behind my head, but I don't have a dog. Story 64. My boyfriend convinced me that he isn't attracted to me or doesn't love me anymore as soon as I woke up, which made me cry. I'm on medication now and doing much better. My boyfriend wasn't even awake when he discovered what was happening. I had no reason to believe anything was wrong between us. Intrusive thoughts are real and quite annoying. That's not even the worst of it. Story 65. I was talking to my girlfriend on the phone. I grabbed a Sprite from the fridge and started walking upstairs to my room. I said, "Hold on a second," took a sip, and spat it all over the staircase. I told her, "I have to call you back." I just spilled Sprite all over the stairs, and then hung up. Almost 30 years later, I still wonder what happened. Story 66. The night before, I had a dream about a project that I needed to correct at work. I dreamt about making the corrections and sending them to the client. When I woke up, I realized it was just a dream, and I still had to go into work to make the corrections. I need a vacation. Story 67. I experience ocular migraines. I had one at work and could only see a small area straight ahead. I was remotely connected to a client server and was clicking randomly. Fortunately, my friend who was next to me noticed and took my mouse, advising me to lie down. Thankfully, I didn't make any mistakes. Story 68. I had one of the most intense and amazing experiences just about a month ago. At the peak of it, my mind exploded into a Christmas tune, and I found myself standing in the dairy section of our local grocery store. Story 69. As an older person, my brain sends messages to my mouth that I shouldn't say. I just laugh it off, saying, "That old brain." Story 70. When a friend of mine left for the airport, I was supposed to accompany her. That morning, I was confused about why I didn't go or why no one told me to wake up. It turned out that I was half asleep, mistakenly giving directions to where she went to rest, believing I was going with her. I felt frustrated with myself for the rest of the day. Story 71. Auditory flashbacks. My brain replaying my now deceased abusive father's voice in my head at some of the worst possible moments. Story 72. Many unpleasant things exist, but it has also inspired an entire novel's worth of amazing content, some of which has been included in an actual novel. Story 73. I am left-handed. One day at work, a woman passed through the kitchen on her way to the smoking area. She stopped to say hi and started rubbing my shoulder in a somewhat flirty manner. I didn't know her very well. Completely unexpectedly, my right hand reached out to grab my chef's knife, and I said, "Please don't touch me." I have no idea where that response came from. Story 74. Hypnagogic hallucinations can be quite distinct from night terrors. While extremely tired and preparing for bed, I sometimes see my family standing in the dark or feel things hit me from behind, as if a poltergeist is throwing objects at me. Once, I experienced what I can only describe as a ball of whispers moving from one room to another. Most of the time, it's just a fleeting glimpse of someone standing in the corner of my eye or peeking around a corner before disappearing. When I check, no one is there, and there isn't even a vent or window for them to escape through. It's quite unsettling. Some hallucinations are less frightening, such as half-formed spiders that resemble animated balls of string, akin to creatures from the Studio Ghibli film, Spirited Away, or a crow whose beak opens and moves like a paper fortune teller. I can typically manage these experiences by ensuring I get enough sleep and handle stress, often through a collection of various herbal teas. It makes me feel like a survival horror protagonist and adds a twist to the idea that the horrors persist, but so do I. Many people can experience this. It's not unique to me, which is why getting a full 8 hours of sleep is crucial. You may need more or less sleep depending on your age. Story 75. I cracked open an egg, put the egg in the trash, and placed the shells in the bowl. I was leaving a store, got to my car, and sat in the back seat. I went to Harbor Freight 3 times in one day and forgot what I went there to get each time. I dressed up to take my wife to her friend's wedding but forgot to pick her up and also forgot to go to the wedding. When I was in college, I missed an entire week and still don't know where I was during that time. It was as if I just woke up at work. I do suffer from migraines. Story 76. They say you shouldn't feel pain in your dreams, but in my experience, that is not true. I sometimes experience excruciating pain. Story 77. Routinely, I experience dream loops that prevent me from waking up. I vividly dream that I am waking up, getting dressed, and going to the bathroom to get ready, only to wake up in bed again and start the process over. This can happen several times in a row. I think 7 times is the record so far. I become half aware of it after the first or second loop. At that point, I try to fight myself awake, but often my brain resists. The same happens with very vivid dreams. My brain can decide that it wants to finish a dream before I am allowed to wake up, even after my alarm has gone off. So, I wake up enough to turn the alarm off and then instantly fall back asleep. I have woken up too late because of this a couple of times. Story 78. I created an extremely realistic dream in which I watched my daughter get hit by a car. We were in our neighborhood, and the interactions and situations leading up to the accident were normal, everyday things. I saw her go to cross the street, and the white car in my peripheral vision alerted me a second too late. I watched in terror as she was struck, heard the impact and the sickening thud as her body went under the wheels. Then, in a panic, the driver reversed, driving over her prone form again before exposing her. The sounds were sickening and unusually soft for something so horrible. I was on the street beside her, afraid to move or touch her. People were gathering, and I hoped someone called for help because I felt worthless. I just kept staring into her vacant eyes, begging her to keep looking at me, as cliché as that sounds. She wasn't really focused on me, and she wasn't speaking or trying to, but I had this ridiculous thought that as long as I could see her eyes and she was looking at me, it was going to be okay, even though everything else in me was screaming that nothing would ever be okay again. Her eyes closed, and I broke into a million pieces. I don't know if I was screaming or crying, but I was begging as everything inside of me revolted against my very existence at that moment. That is when I woke up, shaking and crying. I was still feeling all those emotions and had all those images in my head. I still have those images in my head, like memories. My brain created these horrible memories for no reason and from nothing. How is it allowed to do that? If someone came along one day and told me the multiverse was real and that I slipped timelines, I would be inclined to believe them because my brain produced such an intense experience. It feels more probable that there are multiple parallel universes that you can slip between than that my brain just created such a real experience through random chemicals and electrical currents working together. Story 79. Brain. Let's have a normal, realistic dream with a coherent story and all that, but let's throw in some violence for no reason. Me? Why? Story 80. Leave my phone in every conceivable non-phone storage place in the house. Cupboards, oven, refrigerator, washing machine, bookshelf. Story 81. I have a condition called Meniere's disease, which causes sudden vertigo attacks that make it feel like the whole world is spinning. Sometimes it knocks me down and makes me feel nauseous. I don't understand why my brain reacts this way. Story 82. My brain creates new words when it cannot find what it is looking for. For instance, I was telling a work colleague that I got one of those heated towel rails for the bathroom instead of the radiator. My brain could not find radiator. So I said, sink gate. Story 83. One time, my family and I went on a trip and stayed with some family friends. Next to where I was sleeping, there was a table with a stuffed animal on it. I woke up the next morning and started petting it because I thought it was our dog. Took me a moment to remember. Story 84. It is currently happening. Keeps playing Rihanna songs on repeat until I give in and play them on Spotify. Story 85. I sleepwalked into my parents' room and moved my fingers weirdly while saying, I'm extremely hungry. Not to mention, there was a cable placed there right before I went to bed, and I somehow stepped over it. Story 86. I'm realizing in my late 40s that I likely have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I get these intense interests where for weeks or months I need to know everything about a certain topic. Then one day the need is just gone and I don't care about it at all. The strangest is One Direction. I knew very little about them during their peak beyond their names and maybe two songs. Then about 4 years ago, I clicked on a social media post about them and just had to dig deeper. For about 2 months, I searched for information in every spare moment. I learned all their history, relationships, rumors, and fan videos. Then one day I thought, what was that all about? And haven't thought about them again. Story 87. I was exhausted during a particularly rough week. As I pulled into the parking lot for work, my eyes were still open and I was driving. My brain started displaying a rapid slideshow that looked like a computer cascading videos. I was so overwhelmed that I had to slow down and pull to the side of the road. I managed to work for about 4 more hours before I decided to take a nap in the car. After sleeping in my vehicle for around 5 hours, I decided to take a sick day. Story 88. I hallucinate every time I wake up. It's normal according to Google. It only recently started. Colors appear strange, shapes look incorrect, and spots on the walls shift. Story 89. Gone fully manic. A concoction of euphoria, powerful feelings, racing thoughts, rapid speech, no sleep, abundant energy, and persistent delusions. This resulted in tremendous fun while breaking many laws and enduring a combined psychotic state. Story 90. I was reading a book when something inside me compelled me to spit into it. I usually don't spit at all, especially after brushing my teeth. It was not a reflex, and to this day I have no idea why that happened. Story 91. One night, I went from a temple festival to my home alone. I was overconfident in my bravery and avoided walking in the dark. However, when I reached home, my mom asked why I had turned off the flashlight. At that moment, I realized I had walked all that way without light, even though my fear didn't affect my thinking. Story 92. Last year, I experienced something called transient global amnesia. One Saturday afternoon, I lost my short-term memory for about 6 hours. I called my wife, who was on vacation with her friend, because I sensed something was wrong. I didn't know where the kids were or why she was away. She suspected I was having a stroke, so she contacted my family, who then called an ambulance. After 2 CT scans and an MRI, my memories gradually started returning, and by the next morning, I was completely fine. Story 93. Sleep paralysis. It only happened once, but it was terrifying. A horrible, very real nightmare. Then I woke up shaking violently, reaching out with my hands formed into claws. All I could move were my eyes. I yelled at my wife, even though I could barely open my mouth until she woke up. She tried as hard as she could to wake me up, but it took 20 to 30 seconds. I hope it never happens again. Story 94. I remember 2 instances of sleepwalking when I was a child. In one, I was at my grandparents' house, and in a dream state, I felt really frustrated because I stood at the door to leave the bedroom but couldn't grasp the doorknob. I woke up in the opposite corner of the room from the door. In the other instance, I was at home and woke up in the bathtub with the water running. Story 95. When I was diagnosed with functional neurological disorder 6 years ago, my wife says I completely changed into a different person with different tastes in food, mannerisms, and the way I talk. Everything. For the first 2 years, she kept talking about getting to know me. She still talks about the old me. Story 96. Intrusive thoughts can be troubling. Changing a baby's diaper raises unsettling questions. Walking down the street, one might imagine stepping off the curb in front of a truck. Washing dishes and my child walks into the kitchen. What if I accidentally harm them with the knife I'm cleaning? I assure you, I don't have harmful intentions, but my mind often wanders to these distressing scenarios. Story 97. While making milkshakes in a blender, my arm lifted, and my hand tried to go into the blender on its own. I had to physically stop it with my other arm. I had no control over it whatsoever. Story 98. I try to snooze my alarm using the calculator app. It happens more often than I would like to admit. I don't know why. Story 99. I have experienced stress-related bouts of aphasia. I can barely speak and I cannot understand others, except for my eldest daughter. Story 100. During finals week, my brother came home with a bag of tacos. I asked for one, and he warned me that they were hot. Without hesitation, I grabbed one from the bag, blew on it, and then ate it. He saw what I did, couldn't believe his eyes, and instantly laughed at me. I laughed too, but I also started to cry because it was funny when I realized what I had done, even though I was very stressed and tired. Story 101. I will randomly have super vivid, hyper-realistic dreams that I can't decipher if those events really happened or are creations of my mind. Story 102. Anxiety attack. My pulse stayed above 100 beats per minute for a week. I experienced a tight chest, constant tension, racing thoughts, and nausea. The strange thing was that I appeared very composed on the outside. I visited a clinic after realizing that a week with a racing pulse was probably not healthy. The doctor seemed skeptical when I described my symptoms but had the nurse check my vital signs. He returned shortly and said, "So you say your pulse gets down to around 105 beats per minute? Because we recorded it at 115. So I just wanted to confirm." An electrocardiogram confirmed that my heart is perfectly healthy. I managed to get it under control, but I had never experienced such difficulty in calming myself down before. Story 103. Once, when I was about 10, my mom bought a new knife. When I was alone in the kitchen, I decided to test how sharp the knives were. I think I intended to go through all of them, but after the first one cut my thumb, I quickly forgot about it. Story 104. I was talking on the phone with my daughter and sort of felt off. Then I woke up on the floor and she was still chatting away, so it must not have lasted long, and I must not have actually fallen. However, it happened on another occasion where I did fall forward and cut my chin a little. Story 105. I woke up and went to make a pot of coffee, as I usually do first thing in the morning. Halfway through, I realized I was putting sugar in the coffee filter instead of the coffee. Story 106. I once got very high with my boyfriend. We were hanging out with his sister and her friend and just talking. I interrupted her mid-sentence and asked in front of everyone if they had been doing makeup earlier because there was foundation or concealer on her arm. Little white streaks. I'm sure you know what they really were. This experience made me more empathetic toward people who say foolish things when intoxicated. Nothing genuinely horrible, but I now understand that silly comments can slip out when your brain isn't functioning properly. Story 107. Once I put down a flash drive on a shelf directly in front of my door. I walked by so many times, looking for that flash drive, and it was on the side of the shelf facing the door. Story 108. For some weeks before sleeping, I felt like an electric current was flowing through my brain and my body. It was painful. Then it stopped. Story 109. It likes to create false memories. Fortunately, they are easy to identify because something is usually wrong with the memory, such as blurred clock numbers or mirrored text. Story 110. Heavy migraines made half of my body feel numb and partially blinded me. That was not a good experience. Story 111. About 15 years ago, I experienced depression. My dreams were so vivid and realistic that I believed they were actual memories. For example, I was talking to a friend in real life and said, "It was so funny when you tripped on the golf course last Tuesday." He looked at me and said, "We didn't golf on Tuesday, and I've never tripped on a golf course." Turned out to be a dream I had about him. The dreams felt realistic. We were having full conversations, and nothing unusual occurred as it often does in dreams. I had similar conversations with other people. It was a scary few weeks when I realized what was happening because I couldn't distinguish between reality and dreams. I would show up to work, fearing something bad would happen due to an argument I had with the manager, but it never occurred. This experience encouraged me to seek help for my depression. After attending group therapy for depression management, I overcame it. However, it was a stressful time, as I worried about potentially harming my relationships with family, friends, and coworkers because I believed my dreams were real. Story 112. Reading something out loud, my brain often interprets one word as a completely different word. This happens especially when I need to get through a lot of text. Words from other paragraphs seep into the paragraph I'm reading, creating a confusing mix. Story 113. Getting obsessed with everything. By this, I mean that my brain cannot let me enjoy things like a video game or a TV show. I become obsessed every time. Then I can only talk about those things I'm obsessed with repeatedly. I've lost many friendships because of this. Well, I'm autistic and have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, so I guess this explains something. Story 114. I will wake up and go through my morning routine and then drive to work. After that, I will actually wake up and do everything I did. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.